We've covered quite a bit of stories out of the Appalachian Mountains here on this channel. Not intentionally, it just happens. When looking for weird and strange stories related to the American South, Appalachia is a looming presence, the hills full of myth and folklore, and the culture that may as well be its own country. But lurking in the shadows of Appalachia is another region full of its own dark and creepy culture, the Ozarks. A mountainous region just as rich with history and folklore as Appalachia. Hills full of legend and superstition, many of which probably haven't even been discovered yet. I've had a good amount of requests for stories out of the Ozarks, and there's also been a growing request for more cryptid stories. It was viewer Aunt B.A. that gave me a two birds with one stone request. There's a mysterious creature that roams the deep woods of the Ozarks. There are some descriptions of the beast, sometime contradicting each other, but there's one thing all of the stories have in common. The creature's scream, where it gets its name, the Ozark Howler. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture, some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. Deep in the hills of the Ozarks, where the land and air itself is thick with superstition and lore, roams a beast known as the Ozark Howler. Documented reports stretch back to the 1950s, but families in those hills have stories of the Howler stretching back generations before that. Stories of the Howler stretch through Missouri and Arkansas, all the way to portions of Texas and Oklahoma. The Ozark Howler is usually described with black or dark shaggy hair, a body the size of a black bear, and having prominent horns on its head. Its most identifiable trait, of course, is the creature's cry, described as a combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's call, and the scream of a woman. It's the cries of the Ozark Howler that's reported more than actual sightings, although sightings have become more abundant in recent years. Skeptics believe the creature is a misidentified black bear, or even an eastern cougar. Locals, though, disregard those claims as quick as skeptics dismiss the claims of the Howler. They see bear as much as we see squirrels, and although wildlife officials claim there isn't a breeding population of cougars in the Ozarks, the people there claim to know full well what a cougar is, some even having cougar sightings separate from those of the Ozark Howler. According to the locals, the Ozark Howler is something different altogether. It's the call of the Ozark Howler that instills fear in the people of the Ozarks. The howl itself is described as deep and guttural and high-pitched all at the same time. Some locals describe it as half-human, the most unearthly scream you'll ever hear. All claim a feeling of dread and a deathly silence following the call of the Ozark Howler. And that may be due to a knowledge deep within their blood, an ancestral memory long forgotten to their conscious mind. The Ozarks were settled in the mid and late 1800s by homesteaders from Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. When those early settlers first heard the calls of the Ozark Howler, they knew exactly what it was. Of course, they had different names for it, but the names all pointed back to a similar creature. The Scottish call it the Cú. The Welsh, the Cún Annan. In Scottish legend, the Cú has the appearance of a wolf, but has the size of a young bull with paws as big as the width of a human hand. It makes its home in the rocks of the Highlands, but hunts silently through both the moors and the highlands. When not silent, though, the people of Scotland took the call of the Cú as a warning. The beast was said to let out 3 brays that could be heard for miles, and anyone hearing the call must rush to safety by the 3rd call, or risk dying from fright. It was also said that the call of the Cú was a warning to lock away nursing women. The belief was that the Cú was on the hunt for women to take back to the fairy mounds to feed the children of the Fae. In Welsh folklore, the Cún Annan roamed the area of the Cader Idris, where the howling foreshadowed death to anyone that heard it. Of course, the natives that these settlers encountered in the Ozarks had strange tales as well. Although they hadn't been seen in thousands of years, the native tribes still carried tales of saber-toothed cats that used to roam the land, and many believe a combination of these legends took roots in the Ozarks to become the Ozark Howler. Many in the area today still believe the call of the Ozark Howler marks the souls of the dead being carried off to the afterlife, while others believe it marks the soon-to-be death of someone they know, if not they themselves. Encounters continued since the time of the settlers. Legendary frontiersman Daniel Boone is even said to have seen the beast in the early 1880s in Missouri. As with many cryptids, though, hoaxes further muddy the waters between legend and truth, leading to more widespread dismissal of all other encounters. As recent as 2015, an individual named John Myers reached out to several news agencies with alleged photos of the Ozark Howler, ones widely considered to be a hoax both by the public at large as well as the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Usually, as with all cryptids, sightings of the Ozark Howler are rare at best, and there's always been a lack of any hard evidence. That is, until 2021. A husband and wife team, a wildlife biologist and zoologist respectively, began documenting their quest for cryptids and other strange wildlife encounters. On Season 1, Episode 2 of Mysterious Creatures with Forrest Galante, the team takes on the legend of the Ozark Howler, and in my personal opinion, offers up the most compelling evidence yet. In that episode, they work with local hunter Andy Free, who describes an encounter with what he believes would have been the Ozark Howler. Although he did not see the creature, the team goes off of his description of the terrain, the smell of the creature he encountered, and the call of the creature from Andy's own description. But it was during a chance encounter with a remote moonshiner deep in the Ozarks that their investigation took an interesting turn. I'll link the clip from the show in the description below, since YouTube didn't like me trying to use some of the segments from it in my presentation here. In a nutshell, the old moonshiner claims that the Ozark Howler is real, but those like himself may have embellished the stories over time to scare off people from the area of the moonshiner's operation. He claims that moonshiners like himself were known to imitate the calls of the Ozark Howler to scare off people when they got too close, something he learned from his grandfather. The research team got a kick out of the demonstration, but then pressed that the moonshiner had previously said that the Ozark Howler was real. He agreed, and stated the reason he knew that was that his grandfather had killed one in the 1920s. To cure the disbelief of the research team, the old moonshiner went to an old footlocker and pulled out the skull and the pelt of the animal he claimed was killed by his grandfather. The research team took samples of the hide and believed it to be that of a North American red wolf, a species believed to be now extinct. The red wolf is a canine native to the American Southeast, although it is listed as critically endangered with its small population in captivity and all but extinct in the wild, attributed to destruction of its natural habitat and interbreeding with coyotes. By the mid-1900s, the population in the wild was regulated to a small number in the Gulf Coast of western Louisiana and eastern Texas. 14 red wolves were taken to begin a captive breeding population between 1974 and 1980. The program found limited success though, and in 1980, the red wolf was declared extinct in the wild. The program saw 2 more attempts at breeding and releasing them into the wild, once in South Carolina in 1978 and in North Carolina in 1987, with very little success. Further attempts were made, and 63 wolves were released into the wild between 1987 and 1994. With these efforts, the wild population of red wolves rose to a population nearing 120 in 2012. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service never put any regulation into place regarding them. By 2018, the population had dropped to just over 40 red wolves in the wild, 14 wild wolves in 2019, and as of October 2021, only 8 wild red wolves were known to exist. Studies of these wild populations recorded no litters born between 2019 and 2020. Conservation groups turned up the pressure on the government, and in 2021, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service increased the protection of the red wolf and started reintroduction attempts. A year later, in 2022, the first recorded wild litter of red wolves was born since 2018. As of 2023, there were between 15 and 17 wild red wolves known to exist, all surviving in the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in North Carolina. It seems the main issue with boosting the red wolf population is the fact that red wolves are largely monogamous throughout their entire lives, and the offspring generally refrain from inbreeding to keep their genes strong and healthy. Although only known to North Carolina and sanctuaries today, the red wolf once extended throughout the southeastern United States, from the Atlantic and Gulf Coast all the way north to the Ohio River Valley and west to central Texas and Missouri. But what about the Ozarks in recent times? In 1940, biologist Stanley P. Young noted that red wolves was still common, but by 1962, a study of skeletal remains throughout Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas showed that the red wolf's population had dropped drastically. The explanation was that either they could not compete with the smaller coyotes that were now encroaching on their territory, or that the red wolf was interbreeding with coyotes, thus breeding themselves out of existence. A further study cemented these ideas. Out of 400 canines captured from the wild for testing, only 43 showed to be red wolves. Further testing on these 43 showed that only 17 were pure red wolves, and 3 of those were deemed unable to breed. The 14 that remained were put into captive breeding programs, but they were so closely related that they would not breed with each other.
So, why the push with all of the information on the American red wolf? Well, let's refer back to the research team and their documentary. They traveled to a wildlife sanctuary that had captive red wolves and brought along the hunter that originally claimed to have the encounter with the Ozark Howler. The hunter, Andy, immediately recognized the musky smell of the animals as the same smell from his previous encounter. Then, in an effort to entice the red wolves into howling, the team played several game calls and wolf calls, but the red wolves seemed to not be interested. It was only after playing the recording of the old moonshiner doing his imitation that the red wolves responded. They answered the moonshiner's howl, their own howls being eerily similar to that from the moonshiner. Further testing from the samples taken from the pelt passed down from the moonshiner's grandfather showed a positive match to that of the American red wolf.
So, our hunter Andy either had an encounter with a cryptid unknown to science, or he had an encounter with a species thought to be extinct in the wild. For me, either is truly extraordinary. That's one lucky man, no matter which way you slice it. So what about you? What do you believe Andy experienced? For me, I kind of hope it was a red wolf. Cryptids are always going to exist in some form or another. Besides, if we're 100% honest, proving the existence of one would probably take away a lot of the magic from the legends. Now, encountering a living species thought to be extinct, a long-lost species, brought back from the dead, per se. That's the kind of stuff I'm here for.